Welcome back to the channel, Little Flexers, or if you're new here, my name is JW, and this is the best place to be to learn about the Pokemon TCG and have some fun along the way. Now, last week, the Pokemon Company International released NAIC registration, and it went about as poorly as one could expect from a company the size of Pokemon. Now, they did a number of things that were a little bit head scratching. The first one was that they utilized the new registration system. There was a new registration system, never had been used before. Up until this point, we had been able to register, pay for, and sign up for tournaments using the RK9 system. Pokemon then decided to roll out this new Rainforce registration system for, at least certainly in North America, the most coveted tournament of the year for most, if not all, players. This is just kind of wild to me, although I'm trying to give the company the benefit of the doubt, because for a while we had been using Arcanine exclusively up until NAIC, and I could imagine that the Pokemon Company wants to maybe not distance themselves from Arcanine and that registration process, but perhaps put their trust in a larger company, a company with more rapport, a company with more resources, and maybe take all the registration for all their major tournaments out of the hands of the small team at Arcanine, but bring it more in-house, or, more corporate, whatever, more safeguards. I don't know. I get the idea here. The Arcanine team, fantastic once again. Can't say enough good things about them. They've kept this whole system afloat for a number of years now. One of the issues that they had last year was that it was a kind of an awkward semi-lottery, semi-first come, first serve system for NAIC registration. And it was also not the greatest. Since then, Arcanine has fixed that system to be more purely first come, first serve. But for a while there, you were basically put into pods when you clicked register, and then you had to fight other players for a specific spot. So you could be there right as registration opened and yet not get a spot. Now, maybe a year ago, you'd have a demand that wasn't as intense, and so after a few minutes, you could probably get in and register for the tournament that you wanted to. We didn't have these tournaments that would sell out in a matter of seconds, but now we do. And this is a real good problem for the company to have, but it is a problem nonetheless for players. On a macro level, if you're looking at the Pokemon Company, this is fantastic to have, right? You look at NAIC selling out in a minute 3,000 players in the TCG portion of the tournament, selling out in a minute across 2 waves, and you're happy because you allocated a certain amount of spots and you filled them with the most amount of players that you wanted. Now, there's a problem with this in the sense that, and we'll never hear this from the Pokemon Company because they can't admit a mistake at this point, but the Play Pokemon team did one of 2 things incorrectly. They either guessed at the amount of players and the amount of demand that would be generated from NAIC, or they didn't book enough space to house all the players to meet the expected demand. So one of those 2 things, seems to be true, and you'll never hear, I think a lot of players wanted, after the NAIC registration debacle, they wanted Pokemon to come out and say, hey, we made a mistake. We only thought that there would be 3,000 players that wanted to sign up. We didn't think that there would be many more than that, and so we put a hard cap. You won't ever hear them say we're looking at expanding the size of the tournament, because up until this point, all signs indicated that we would be, if there was space, we would have like the largest tournament of all time, right? We just had the largest regionals of all time. We had the largest internationals of all time in Europe, And the biggest player base is here in North America. So why wouldn't this be one of those massive tournaments? I digress. That's not really the point of this video. The point of this video is to kind of rehash what went down with this new registration system. But there is a big registration problem for the ICs. Now, in the Pokemon circuit, you have Worlds, which is the biggest carrot for a lot of players, and it's the only tournament on the circuit that's invite only, and that's what makes it really special. You get a lot of swag, there's a lot of prestige for achieving a Worlds invite, and it's the tournament that many competitive players aspire to one day play in or continue playing in. You know, players have been some of the top level players have been playing in the Worlds tournament for a number of years. And so that is kind of the end goal for a lot of these players, and a chance to chase the clout and the money of a first place finish at Worlds. And so that is kind of the premier tournament. Everything leads into that. You're even seeing that now with the Pokemon promotional materials that they play before the regionals. It's like everything is kind of pointing and directed toward Worlds. But then the step below that is of course, international championships. And you look at those as well, and Pokemon is also putting those on a pedestal, as they should be, as kind of like mini Worlds events. They have half the prize money of Worlds, but they do offer kind of a similar prestige. Players that win the international championships are featured in a lot of the promotional materials. They really try to keep up with the storylines at these international championships. The setting for the event, all in terms of all of the stuff that they do inside the convention center, is, you know, geared toward making this feel very special and different from, say, a regional championship, which, you know, maybe has the stage, maybe has a few decorations, but for NAIC they have the music playing. They might have like a big, you know, intro segment. They might do a lot of videos surrounding the event, and certainly more decorations and more side events and more surrounding. They have a store that they will do, a pop-up store for each of these internationals. So again, they're trying to make this a Worlds style event, like Worlds light, for everyone. And that raises a lot of issues, because now you have a system where you're encouraging everyone to play, but not everyone can play. And so there's kind of a dichotomy there. There's a butting of heads between what you want, or at least say that, you know, it appears that you want, and what you actually have. So the biggest issue with the registration, and I'm going to talk about this now, is that you had this player base that is massive. I mean, North America is the largest player base in the world, and they all would love to play at this event. I mean, it only makes sense, right? You're only going to put the international championships in the countries or in the regions that have the most players. That's why the Oceania international championships were axed this year. There was no more, championships over in Australia. The players there are fantastic. It just is not the most populous player base. So I think it's really important that there be enough spots available for the people that would like to register for this event. However, there's another thread here where you're also saying that, you know, this is the second tier. If Worlds is the highest tier of competitive event, the invite only tournament, the most prestige, and we're saying that internationals are the second tier event, the second most prestigious tournament on the circuit, and yet you do want to have as many players as possible. You're kind of also saying as the company that you value the prestige of the tournament. You do want to make storylines out of these players. You want to hype up these players, these great players that play and compete and do well at the internationals. But then you also want to have new players come to the tournament, have that be their Worlds, have that be their premier event of the season that they attend, their most special tournament, I guess, right? So you're also kind of balancing, how do I make sure that we have the top level competition, and how do we make sure that the new players can get into the tournament? So what can end up happening is that when you have that cap, you're going to inevitably leave off either some newer players that want to get into the tournament, that want to play there at the international championships, and that's their kind of pinnacle, or you're going to leave out players that are either close to or have their world's invite and, are considered, above average players or top tier players. And so there's going to be that without auto invites for either party, somebody's going to be a little bit depressed, right? Because you're either a new player and you'd love to get this experience at the international championship. This is the one tournament all year that you've, saved up for, you're going to travel to, you're going to spend a week there, and make it a big event. Or you're the competitive level player that, frankly, and this comes back to another issue with the circuit right now. The international championships are way, in my opinion, too heavily weighted compared to the rest of the circuit. I think they're at a good place in terms of the amount of payout that they give, all the way down to top 64. The amount of points that they give, I actually think, like in the context of a whole season and the context of how many points a player needs for Worlds, the international championships feel like appropriately weighted. Whereas I think a regional should give out more points all the way down, but that's like a whole separate video, and we will make that at some point. But the international championships for the competitive player are it's the best like time investment to point and money payout ratios that we have, right? And if you're a competitive player, your preference would be to attend an international championship over a regional every single time. Now there's only 3. So of course you have to fill in the blanks there. You have to fill in the gaps with your regional championships and locals and things like that. But you would much rather, have given the choice, go to an international championship because you're going to get more points, you're going to get more money, more clout for doing well. A big discourse that I was seeing online was players saying that, only the best players should get priority. There's something to that, because if Pokemon wants to make this the most prestigious tournament, then they need to have and prioritize the best players. Now you say, well, JW, there's, kind of a difference there, because the stipend earners, which are the top, X amount of players in each region. For North America, it's 16. For Europe, it's 22. And there's other regions that get, travel awards to these internationals based on their performances throughout the season. And you say, well, they already get a priority registration, so they are going to be there. So maybe that fulfills this, top player, desire, again, from the Pokemon Company. They want to have the best players attend their tournaments. That's why they give them money to go to tournaments. That's why they give them the priority registration. But then people are saying, well, what about that player that maybe doesn't go to as many tournaments, but can stack up against the best, right? I might put myself in that conversation, right? I have a regional win, a regional top 4 this season, a few other accomplishments in years past. Like, I feel like I'm right up there, but because of the amount of responsibilities that I have, I just can't attend every tournament. I've been to 5 regionals this year, and no internationals, right? So compare that to any top tier player, and I just haven't attended that many events. And yet I would still say my season stacks up pretty nicely against most other players. I'm just using myself as an example, because I can't speak for really anybody else. But, there was a chance that I could have missed out on NAIC. And you say, well, that's kind of crazy. Okay, so maybe that discussion needs to be had, where how many players, how many top level players should be allowed to make it in? How should we make that adjustment? Should we say that the top X amount of players in each region, plus every regional winner, plus every person that has at least their world's invite or higher, that has X amount of points or higher? How do you make that determination on who should get the priority registration? Wherever you draw the line, you're conflicting again with the idea that this is an open invitation tournament. From the company's perspective, you want to bring in the new blood. You want to make it an event that's so enticing to a newer player that they decide to go and play and spend money and buy side event tickets and merchandise at the store. You want to get that newer player. Maybe even you want that more casual player that's going to, come in and spend more money at your event. You want that actively. So there's this issue here that I'm seeing where, players are talking on Twitter or Facebook, and they're saying there should be more players given priority privilege for signups for this event, especially with how poorly it was run. And we'll talk about some of the issues with the actual registration process and why it's not actually equitable to do it the way that they did it. I can't believe that this was how they registered players, and we'll get to that in just a second. But to kind of wrap up on this, top player versus newer player, I think you can't go entirely by players that have played the most. They did have this system, this hidden system that nobody really knew about until, I don't know, the day or two before registration, where they gave priority registration access to players that had more play points, that had the most play points. So players that were the most dedicated players, maybe not the best players, but they went to the most events. They got priority registration to NAIC. And then, of course, the top X number of players from every region got priority access. And then everyone else was sat fighting for the open spots that were left. On the other side, you had a ton of new players that would love to go to New Orleans. They're not really chasing a World's invite. They just want to have the experience of playing in this high-level tournament against players that they know. Really, they want to compete with the best, right? And I think that should be valued as well. So I think the players that are saying this tournament should be, essentially invite only, or there should be more of a threshold given to, competitive players, I think have a point. And then players on the other side that say, I think that it should just be a free-for-all for everybody. They kind of also have a point, but I think the solution lands somewhere in the middle. Now, if I'm the Play Pokemon organizer, how do I handle this? I think I sway a little bit more, and this is just, again, from me as a competitive player, I sway a little bit more toward making sure that the better players are able to register. Players I might give priority access to would be players that have, top forward a regional, in addition to, at some point this season, in addition to the top X from every region. And that might be, a few dozen or more, depending on how many players from each region decide to go to that particular international. And then that's a little bit of a time sink to try to keep track of that. So I could understand why they maybe wouldn't want to go that hard. They just say, okay, boom, it's cut and dry, top X players from this region, and they're tracking that and they're giving the money and stuff. And then the players above this amount of threshold for play point. Like, I could definitely see why they did that, because it's certainly a lot to keep track of the more stipulations they add. Okay, you have a top 4 at a regional, or you've played every event in this quarter, so you get to priority register, or you've won, 3 league cups this quarter, so you get priority. Like, it's a lot to keep track of, and I can see from a company perspective why they maybe would just want to make it a little more black and white. Top X amount of players. All that said, I think that they should strike that better balance. I do feel like more players should be given priority registration based on their performance throughout the season, even if they can't attend all the events. Again, I feel like I'm a great example, right? I can't attend every event. I have these other responsibilities. I have a family, but I have placed well in the events that I've gone to. So where's that line? I don't know exactly, but it does again feel like there should be a skew. Here's where things get dicey for the signups. Now, registration was horrible, awful, terrible, mind-bogglingly crazy. One caveat, though. One caveat. I didn't actually sign up for myself. My wife signed me up. So I'm going to say all this with a grain of salt, because I didn't actually go through the registration process, and I still got a spot in NAIC because my wife signed me up. I had work. Okay. I was working. I was playing in the orchestra. All right. And I'm not going on my phone and also trying to play Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet at the same time. It's just not going to happen. All right. So I was like, hey, Ann, here's a link. Sign me up. And she was somehow able to get in. I don't know. She'd never registered me for a tournament before. And now it's this whole new convoluted system. What went wrong with registration? There was a lot. I wanted to make this video because, first of all, I wanted to archive for the aliens in a couple hundred years that look back on all the archived human footage. Maybe I'll be used in a classroom at some point. It's kind of a historical document, historical reference, if you will. But the other reason I want to make this video is because we just got to talk about how bad, mind-bogglingly bad this registration process was. Okay. And I'm kind of doing this kind of secondarily through the people that posted on Twitter, friends and acquaintances that have posted. I was able to read through a number of threads outlining exactly the process and exactly what went wrong. And so with this new Rainforce, I'm going to refer to them as Rainforce. That's the company behind this secondary site. And then there's also Arcanine Labs. That was the old way of doing things. Arcanine, that still has a hand in this. Okay, it's really complicated, again, like I said, so try to keep track. Arcanine handled the registration for the tournament and is going to be handling like all tournament things, round by round, player matchups, calculating resistance, all this kind of stuff. Everything kind of stays there in Arcanine. So you have that piece of it. And then you have this, we're going to refer to it as Rainforce, the new portal that Pokemon created to sign up for this international championship. So we have Rainforce and we have Arcanine. Okay. Rainforce was where players would go to log in and register for the tournament, pay for the tournament, and essentially reserve their spot. Now, why was this an issue? Okay. They announced that this would be the registration portal a couple weeks before NAIC. I don't know any exact time, but it was a while before, maybe a week before. I don't know exactly, but they announced it before, well before everybody could get acquainted with this new site. And everyone was getting acquainted with this new site, and they were seeing that there was a countdown timer on the Rainforce site that kept up in what was perceived to be real time. And so it said, check back in once the timer hits 0. Okay. So players come back to the site at 8 p.m. Eastern time on the day of registration, and they go in to the Rainforce site and nothing works. And they click refresh because that's sometimes what you could do at Arcanine. And they went and tried to register and nothing happened. And then they clicked again and they refreshed and they refreshed and they refreshed and they refreshed. And they didn't really understand how this new system worked. Apparently, you had to log out, which doesn't make any sense because you already logged in. And once the timer hits 0, theoretically, you should be able to register for or buy that ticket, register for that tournament, do that action that the timer was saying that you couldn't do until a very specific time. So you had to log out and then log back in and then go through the whole process. But even if you logged back out and logged back in and clicked register, that did not guarantee you a spot because there was a time element to how quickly you could register. So if a player clicked register for the tournament and they clicked to their specific domain, TCG, VGC, Go, they would have to fill out all the information faster than their counterpart who was on the other side of the world filling out the same form. This was what was so mind-boggling about this registration process, is that there was this race condition. You have all these players racing to input their information. And you couldn't even use, from my understanding, auto-populate. That's a very common thing with websites, is, the browser will save your credit card information, and then you can just go kind of like one click, boom, boom. It inputs all your data, and then you carry on with your purchase. That just didn't happen. Auto-populate didn't register, or the players that tried to auto-populate it wouldn't accept it. And so that led to players having to run down. I know it's like me. I got to run downstairs. I got to run to the back room. I got to grab my wallet, run back upstairs, input the information. And all the while you're doing that, all the other spots could be filled because players had their credit cards there, or they could input their data faster. And that's what gets me about this event, is that it wasn't equitable. If you're going to have all these slots available for the vast majority of players, then it needs to be, I think, personally, I really would not like a lottery for this kind of stuff, like a pure lottery. That would suck. I would hate that, right? If I miss out on registration because I'm too slow, that's one thing. If I miss out on registration because I just miss the lottery, and that's a system that they have for some tournaments in Japan, I'm really not advocating for that. Although it is, arguably the most equitable in some regards. But I'm not advocating for that, but that certainly could be what happened in this particular case. And this is why it's so frustrating, is that you have players that log in, log out, log in, click register, go to fill out their card information, and then still don't get in because everyone else that, figured out that process a little bit quicker and were able to register before. And there's that issue too, because they clicked register. Some players had the tournament registration in their virtual cart, and they weren't able to register because they didn't pay faster than somebody else. And that involves kind of a timing thing that is just not very equitable, right? If you have a player that has a disability, or if you have a player that is on the younger side, right? If they're a 16-year-old and they don't have a credit card and they got to go ask mom and dad to go get their credit card, or they're a player that they're trying to do it from their mobile phone and they don't have access to their credit card, or whatever it is. They just put a lot of these hoops in place that made it very difficult for players that were disadvantaged or were in kind of a weird position with the registration process to not have their information readily available, or be able to input it fast enough. I mean, you maybe have those, another example would be like somebody who's dyslexic or who has some kind of learning condition, right? Where they just, they're going to input things wrong, or they can't quite, do numbers right, or I don't know, whatever. That's not my lived experience. So if I'm speaking out of turn there, like, forgive me. But you just have, again, there's all these different factors that players may have that would lead to them not being able to register as fast as somebody else. And that's crazy, right? In my opinion, and I think a lot of other players, and I think this is why you saw so much vitriol thrown and spewed at the Pokemon Company for how they handled this registration, is that it was entirely time-based, and the players that could input their credit cards faster than another player were able to register before that other player. And it maybe led to players that were more dedicated, that had gone to more events, that were better players, that would be on top of the circuit, that would be right there when the event was open for registration. It led to those players, some of those players, not being able to register before the new guy, right? And so you're seeing these players that were quote unquote better, are quote unquote the players that Pokemon would love to see at these events, I think, left out of the tournament because they couldn't register faster than Johnny down the street who has his credit card information memorized. And that's where the biggest issue with this registration comes for me. Now, Arcanine has it figured out, I think. And it kind of frustrates me and baffles me that that Play Pokemon has gone in this new direction, and who knows if they'll continue on in this direction. But the debacle that we had last year with NAIC registration that I talked about earlier in the video, we don't have. They actually fixed a lot of those problems. And so what I like about Arcanine registration is that you click on the tournament, and then, as soon as it opens, and then you are able to, you have kind of a 15-minute window to input your credit card information. So really the only timed aspect of the Arcanine registration is, boom, I'm going to click did I click the button fast enough right when the event opened, right? And so for a lot of high level players, they're going to be on top of it. They're going to know, okay, I'm going to, I click this button right at 8 p.m. and boom, I have a little bit of breathing room to go find my credit card and input all that information. If something goes wrong, I can refresh the page and it's still going to save. And Arcanine fixed the whole, multiple players fighting over a single spot issue, like potted system that they used to have to be a pure first come first serve situation. So they've made a lot of improvements over the last year. And I'm not really sure why we went from that, which was a good system, to this new system, which has very bad UI. It has really bad error messages from a UI perspective. It has a very bad communication system for telling players what's wrong. There were players that had items in their cart. They had the registration in their cart. They went to go pay, and there was no real notification that it was all sold out. And the log in, log out thing maybe should have been a little bit more clear on the website. There are all these factors here that just made it a very frustrating and kind of scary experience for a lot of players. This is a whole other topic. I feel like almost for another video. Man, I'm getting so many video ideas for making one video, but there's like so many players that rely or will rely or hoping for this tournament to happen, for the registration to go through successfully, to be able to play in this tournament, because they need, again, the points to hit the carrot on the stick of Worlds at the end of the year. They need this tournament. This is like, for players in North America that don't already have an invite, this is the best way to finish off their point threshold, right? And you think about it too, like North America, we need this. North American players need this, dude. We have to get 600 points, man. That's a lot of points, dude. If you're trying to chase Worlds and you have responsibilities, right? And you can't go to every single tournament. You need the international championships, and you need the international championship in your country to have a shot. That's just frankly the way it goes. That's just how it is with the system, the way it's designed right now. That's just what it is. Doesn't really matter your performances in other tournaments. It really doesn't matter. You need, for a majority of these players that are really close to the invite, they need the international to be able to finish it off. And that makes it really stressful for those players. Me, I would have been crushed if I hadn't made it in, but doesn't really matter. I got the little carrot. I'm going to Worlds, and I don't, I want to play in it. The internationals, I've only played in 3, and I've done really bad at all of them. And so I'm like really trying to like go for that big spike. That's the one tournament that I never feel like I play well in. And so I would love to play, but I wouldn't have been, crushed if I didn't make it. Now flip over to the player that needs the last 100 points or last 50 points to make their Worlds invite, and they don't make it. Gosh, dude. I mean, that's just tough. That's just really, really a tough thing. So there's a lot to be said about the North American International Championship and where it's placed in the circuit. This is the last major tournament, before Worlds. And you have a lot of players. This is the biggest player base in North America that needs the most amount of points to achieve a Worlds invite. And you put the tournament last. And so, of course, there's going to be such a big demand. Of course, we're going to fill up to capacity, right? It's going to be, at least in my brain, the way I'm thinking, and maybe I'm an idiot. Please tell me in the comment section if I'm making absolutely no sense, because that's fair. Sometimes in my old age, I get my wires crossed. But tell me why, for the international championship in the country with the most amount of players at the end of the season, when all the, like, kind of your whole season you've been, dinking and dunking, and if you haven't won a regional and you haven't gone to all the tournaments, you're trying to angle yourself to like put yourself in as good a position at the international championship to have that deep run that you need to finish off the world invite. We're putting it last on the season. We're putting it, we're like the company is literally, with the placement, consistent placement, right? This is not just a one-time thing. They could always, every year they could switch up the international championships. No, they keep NAIC as the last major tournament since they've had ICs. And I think that's on purpose. But you're creating this, it's like self-inflicted wounds. You're creating this hype. You're creating this, kind of, I say necessity, like we're playing a children's card game. This is just a hobby. When I say necessity, I don't actually mean that it's necessary. I feel very blessed to be able to play this game in the capacity that I do and be able to teach this game in the capacity that I do. So like, don't hear me say necessity and be like, oh, he's so entitled. It's like, it's not that. It's really not that. Of course, the most dissenting opinion are going to be the loudest. You're going to see that on the social media platforms. The players that are really furious with the registration system are going to be the loudest. They're going to have the most voice. They're going to have the most to say about this registration process. So, there's certainly some of that. I'm sure the majority of players that wanted to attend were able to make it in. But yeah, the company is creating this like artificial demand for this tournament by putting for most people's carrot, putting the most important tournament at the end. If they put it at the beginning and you miss registration, no sweat. You got a whole year to figure it out. Put it at the end, and then you cap it like you did, and you make the registration process the way that you did. Yeah, man, like, people are going to be mad. People are going to be mad, no matter how you slice it. I just think it was poor execution, set up by where you put the tournament, how much you dangle the carrot of Worlds, and it led to, I don't think anyone, maybe I'm the only one that was satisfied with registration because I didn't actually have to go through it. You have what seems like a majority of the player base saying, this was a whiff, this was a miss, there were issues here that need to be resolved for future tournaments. But for Pokemon, let's take it back, big picture, individually, horrible process. Nobody likes it. Many people are saying this. Nobody's happy with the registration for NAIC. Big picture, if you're the company, this is good. Okay? This is a good thing. How am I saying that? How am I spinning this to be a good thing for the company? Okay. Pokemon changed locations. For the last few years, we had been in Columbus for NAIC, and we had been seeing, really, if you look at the upward trend of tournament attendance, it's been upward, right? If you look at the trend for tournaments, it's been, in terms of attendance, pretty much entirely upward. We're seeing regional after regional. It seems like we're saying this is the biggest regional of all time. This is the biggest regional of all time, the biggest international championship of all time. More players are interested in playing the game than ever. And the Midwest certainly has like a large concentration of top level players, or certainly, there's a large player base in the Midwest. Columbus, Ohio made a lot of sense, in my opinion, for an international championship to be. Say what you will about the city. I love it. I've lived here for the last 5 years. I think it's a great city, very, cheap and easy to get around. Say what you will about the city, but it was a great location to have the event. Very drivable for a number of players. Honestly, haters can stay mad about flying into the tournament, but it's fine. I've really never had an issue with Columbus Airport and getting through and having it be cheap enough, right, to attend. But say what you will there. They move locations down to New Orleans. And I think if you're the head of the company, you do want to make sure that this tournament sells out. You can't have, this big tournament, again, that you're hyping up. It's the last tournament of the season. You can't have this big tournament flop and not sell out. So I think as the head organizer, you do want to be conscious of that and put a cap. Because I've seen this argument a lot. Why don't they just have, 5,000 players? Right? Why don't they open up registration to 5,000 TCG Masters? It's like, sure, you can have that, but from a company perspective, you're changing locations, so there might be a drop-off. You want to hedge your bets against that, right? You still want to make it a huge tournament, but you would really rather not, 5,000 players and then, 3,500 register, right? That doesn't look as good. That's... certainly you're investing more money to have a bigger space, but then it doesn't sell out. And so how are you justifying that to the stakeholders or whoever is, profiting off of the event, right? You want to make sure that it is large, obviously, but, especially if you're changing locations, like you do want to make sure that you have capacity filled, right? It'd be like going to Disney World and you're riding the Tower of Terror and, you're the only one in the cart. Right? Well, that maybe says a couple different things. Something's wrong with the ride. The other carts can't be used. People that are running the ride are not competent enough to fill it out. There's a lot of storylines that can be made from a corporate perspective about what happens if you don't fill out a tournament like this with all the hype and all the importance of an international championship. And again, this kind of comes back to like, why aren't we seeing Oceania included on the international championship schedule? Well, that tournament generated about 800 players or so. Again, great player base in Australia, but you look at the numbers and it doesn't compete, right? It doesn't hold up. from a numbers perspective. And so I think that's an important part about this that we aren't considering as a community, is that Pokemon wants to make sure that this thing is packed to the brim. And I think they were a little bit measured, right? And we're seeing this year after year as the scene grows, as more players get interested and involved. We're seeing regionals, especially. This is the way that you can really kind of see the trends. They've been getting bigger and bigger and bigger because we've been reaching capacity event after event. And now organizers are more prepared to open it up. So if we have a tournament again in New Orleans, this has been the trend for a while for Pokemon to kind of like set up a home base for whether it was nationals in Indianapolis or the international championships when they started that series in Columbus, and now they're moving it to New Orleans. I think if we are back in New Orleans again next year, expect a bigger cap, right? Expect a 3,500 player cap or a 4,000 player cap. But right now, I think there was maybe a measured approach taken to how many players they could have. So anyway, that was a really long video about maybe nothing that interested you. It certainly interested me. I mean, this was fascinating. This was just like, there are a lot of times where I'm like, the Pokemon Company is really surprising me right now with what they've done, and I'm like, that's really interesting. Why did they make that choice? And that was what this video was all about, trying to get my thoughts out about what actually happened with this whole registration process. If I missed something, please let me know down in the comment section below, because this was like, it worked out for me, right? It was fine for me. And I didn't have any of that stress, but I know there are players out there watching it. Whether you did or didn't get into this tournament, you had stress, right? And so, let me know about that experience down in the comment section below. If I missed something, let me know. If you have a new perspective that I didn't quite hit, please let me know. This was just a wild day or two with the 2 waves on social media. Just absolutely fantastic stuff. Really one of the more interesting things that I've ever seen from this company. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to subscribe for more videos like this in the future. If I don't see you soon, I'll see you later. And remember, good luck, and also have fun.